Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Let's take care of some housekeeping first. For those of you that haven't used the Zoom platform before, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, you'll see there's some options for you. You're going to want to have the chat window open because there's going to be some back channeling that's going on there. We're going to try and make this as conversational and interactive as possible. So I am going to be throwing out some questions for you and taking some of your answers from the chat box. Also, please make sure that your microphone is muted unless it's time for you to speak, just so that we don't get all of the background noise from 20 or 30 different people coming through distracting us. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out in the chat box and we'll do what we can to get you settled. So welcome to a joint webinar between Enstoy and Empatico. Through someone else's eyes, we're going to be focusing on empathy, respect, compassion, and building perspective for your students in the classroom today. And as someone who has been involved in global learning and connecting classrooms for well over a decade now, I'm excited to share a little bit about Empatico because it is quite honestly one of the easiest ways I've ever seen to connect your classroom to someone else. So what we're hoping for tonight is that we're going to get some input from you, but also that for those of you that have never done this kind of thing, connecting your classroom to others before, that you're going to leave tonight with the ability to do that tomorrow when you go into your classroom. I know as a teacher, when I go to professional learning sessions or listen to webinars, sure, I want to be inspired, but I also want something that I can do with my kids. And so we're going to try and make sure that we give that to you today. Okay. So Lori, if we can advance to the next slide there. So there's two things that I'm going to ask you to put in the chat box as we get started here. The first is I'd like you to tell us who you are, what you do, what kind of job and teaching you have, maybe the age of your students, your location, some of the unique things about where you teach, maybe some of the issues that you deal with in your classroom, just briefly. But also we want you to answer this question. And I think this is more relevant than ever before. But why is it important for your students to have compassion for others? Why is that skill so important right now, especially? I mean, I think it's always been important, but I think right now with the state of things, not just in the United States, but around the world, compassion and empathy are skills that our children are going to need more and more. So go ahead and give us your answer to that. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna share some stories from my own students. I remember the moment that this hit me like a ton of bricks, that empathy is perhaps the most important thing that we can be passing on to our kids. I had written a grant to go and document the learning gains from a global learning experience that my students had worked on in the Kibera slum of Nairobi, which Kibera is the largest and one of the poorest slums in Africa. And I was in the Kibera slum, and my students had worked with kids in Greece and Kansas, actually not far from where one of our hosts, Jesse, is from today. I'm going to introduce you in a second. But those students had all raised money for water filters, and I was blessed to be there, and I got to pass out the water filters to the kids in the Kibera slum. And that was a wonderful experience in itself. But what was so impactful for me was the joint video conference call that my students had with not just the other kids that raised money, but from the kids that were receiving the filters. And there were, as you can imagine, that was a really emotional experience, and kids were crying on both ends of that call. For the kids in Kibera, they were hugging their filters in a just such a emotional way, because I was there during the rainy season where there was a cholera outbreak, and the water filters that I was able to pass along to them that my students had provided quite possibly could have saved the lives of them and their siblings. 12 kids died of cholera during the 2 weeks that I was there in Kenya. But what was so amazing for me as I looked through the screen was to see my students with tears in their eyes, and I knew from that moment on that for the rest of their lives, my students would look for ways to use their learning to make the world a better place and to help others. And learning for them was no longer about passing tests and quizzes on Friday. It was for doing good for other people. And I think that's the kind of thing that we all want our students to experience in school. We want them to know that learning has a purpose. So that's kind of a short version of what makes this so important to me, and the experience that really showed me the power of empathy and compassion in the classroom. But I'd like to look at some of your answers here. So I see Sandra shares that as a kindergarten teacher, compassion is important because it allows students to connect. And she's got the words empathetically and sympathetically in there. And I think that's so important because we're dealing with at a time where technology is exploding, right? And there's so much emphasis on educational technology in schools, but education has always been about relationships, right? The relationship between teachers and students, the relationships between students themselves. And those relationships aren't possible if kids can't empathize and connect with each other. So I love that answer. I see Sarah talking about working in a high poverty area. I think that's key. Our children come with such emotional baggage from those situations, whether it's urban poverty or rural poverty. It is important for students to have compassion so they connect with each other on a human level. I think that's so true. So I'm gonna look through some of those, but Lori, if we could advance to the next slide, I think it's time that I introduce everyone else who is on the call. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Mike Soskel. I'm the 2017-18 Pennsylvania Teacher of the Year. As I mentioned before, I've been working with my students, having global learning experiences for about a decade. Since I started keeping track in the last 4 or 5 years, my kids have connected with over 94 different countries, with astronauts on the International Space Station, and with scientists. We've worked side by side with scientists in Antarctica who are studying penguins. With us tonight is Jesse Ediger, who's an amazing teacher from Hutchinson, Kansas. Jesse, I don't know what it is, but I have so many teacher friends in Kansas who are doing amazing work. So you guys, there must be something in the water out there, or the sunflowers out there in Kansas.
It's an exciting place to be right now. That's for sure. I'm proud.
Yeah, you guys are doing some great work out there. So I can't wait to hear your stories. And one of the things that Jessie is going to be able to bring to us tonight is she has direct experience using the Empatico platform to connect her students. So we're going to hear some narratives and some stories from her classroom and how that really made an impact. And then we have 2 members of the Empatico team with us tonight who are going to share a little bit about the reason why this tool was developed and how it works. They're going to take you on a tour. And that's Kristen Unstead and Travis Hardy. So hi, Kristen and Travis.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so now that introductions are out of the way, I'm going to go back and take a look at some of the other responses here. Having dialogue, I'm seeing Michelle speaking, or the chat that she put in there. Understanding multiple perspectives. I think that is so key because especially for children as they're growing up, because they haven't had quite the experiences that adults have, it's hard for them to empathize. It's hard for them to put themselves in other people's shoes. And it's really a skill that we have to explicitly focus on in schools. And there's lots of different ways to do that, but giving them opportunities to learn with those who are very different than them and come from different backgrounds is a great way to start building that dialogue. I see Darby. I know Darby posted earlier before that she was exhausted, but that she was going to fight through it to stay up and be on this webinar tonight. So Darby, I'm glad that you joined us. And yeah, as a STEM teacher in a rural area, it's important to make sure that students are understanding each other. And we see some of those words again and again: relationships, understanding, having multiple perspectives. And all of that allows kids to converse and to build relationships. All right. So, Lori, if we can advance. So, I gave a little bit of this in the beginning, but I know some others have joined us. Why are we here today? What are we looking to do? And I think there's a couple of different objectives here. As I mentioned in the beginning, I want you to leave with something tangible that you can do with your students tomorrow. So we're going to try and give you some real ideas of how to connect. If you are a 3rd or a 4th grade teacher and you teach kids in those ages, I think Empatico is going to be an amazing platform. And I think you're going to leave just as excited as I am about the tool. You're also going to hear some stories from me, from Jesse, and possibly from some others on the call about the power of global learning experiences and how it impacts students and how it allows us to develop skills and competencies in kids that are so important for today's world. And I think you're going to get a little perspective from the Empatico team on exactly why it's so important that that this is possible right now at this time, because the world is changing. And the human brain hasn't really changed a whole lot. Evolution doesn't happen that quickly, but technology is forcing society to change in a lot of different ways, and our schools are reflecting that. And so we want to make sure that we bring all of those pieces together for you to make sure that you leave after this hour with some real great ideas and some inspiration. Lori, if you can move to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and Travis right now. And if you guys could tell us a little bit about Empatico, how it came to be, and a little bit about the platform, that would be fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Onstad. If you're catching up on the chat, a brief intro. I currently live in New York City. I used to be a teacher in California, worked in Philadelphia, Oregon, Washington, was born in Wyoming, so I have been all over the place, grew up very rural. My husband is an architect and absolutely is in love with cities, so that brought us to the biggest city we could find in this country, but have been in lots of different places. I currently lead business development at Empatico, which basically means I have the amazing job every day to get to talk with people like Mike and like Jesse, who you'll hear from in a moment, and learn what we can do as an organization and as we're building this tool to make it the best we can do. When I was a teacher, I remember one of my students years ago who I still talk to, she said to me recently, she's in college now, and I was her second grade teacher, but she said, do you remember, Miss Onstad, that day you took me to San Jose State University, which was literally 8 miles from our school. It was the first university campus she had ever been on, and she's now currently enrolled there as a student, the first in her family to go to school. And I am reminded constantly by the power of moments like that for me, honestly, that day wasn't like exactly memorable. I remember it, but it didn't change my course. And I think for Tatiana, it did. Where Empatico comes from, we are fully funded by the Kind Foundations. In full transparency, that is the Kind company that makes like the snack bars, if you're familiar with those. One of the missions of the company is to give back to the world. And one of the questions that the foundation is asking is, how do we teach future generations to act with empathy and kindness? And one of the ways we're exploring how to contribute in that way is through Empatico. We thought a lot about all the things we could do and decided that if we could build the best possible tool to give even more kids and teachers access to connect with each other, that would be a worthwhile contribution. We have the distinct, real privilege to be able to do that for absolutely free. For teachers. We will never charge for it. Our singular mission is to try to build the best possible tool we can. We are really early on. We just launched a beta version of the tool in November and are working very closely with hundreds of teachers around the world at this point to get feedback, to make it great, and to really learn what's working about it and what's not, and what else is needed. Like I said, I've just, Jessie in particular, I've had a chance to really learn from, and she'll share her story in a minute. But what we most need, honestly, is just great feedback. And what we hope is that we're building something great enough that many people will be willing to try it. And if you've never connected with another classroom or another teacher, we hope that we'll make this, as Mike said, easy enough that you'll give it a shot.
Yeah. So Kristen, that's before you get into the platform itself. I'm looking at our pre-survey data here, and almost half of the teachers on the call tonight have never had a connection before.
I noticed
and I think that's actually a great for us as a group. That's a great percentage, because we have half of our participants tonight who have real stories that they can share with us. Real experiences that they can relate to the others. And we have half of our participants who are looking to do this for the first time. And I also, what struck me as I went through some of the survey responses are the similarities in why people haven't had connections before.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to time. How does this fit into the curriculum, right? There's so many other things that we have to teach. I don't know how. And so that'll definitely be addressed on the webinar today. I don't know how to find connections. That's something I get a lot when I'm out giving teacher workshops and talking about global learning. Like, how do I find connections? And Empatico does this better than any other tool I've seen. The connections are really easy for you. So if you're one of the people that put that in your survey as a concern, we're definitely going to take care of that for you today. And also some of the logistics of, if I am doing this with my class, what are my kids doing in the background, right? How do I just have classroom management skills for this kind of experience that I've never done before? So maybe you could take us through a little bit of the platform with those things in mind.
Yep. Travis, do you want to take it?
Sure. So hi, I'm Travis Hardy, Program Manager with Empatico. And just quick introduction, I've been with Empatico for about a year, and before coming to Empatico, I've been working for about 5 or 6 years on a global education program for the city of New York, and that was really about opening up the world for New York City kids through asynchronous exchanges with students in other large cities, so blogging, online forums, digital portfolios. And what really drew me to Empatico was this opportunity to connect anyone and everyone from all over the world and in real time, where the emphasis is on facilitating meaningful interaction. So I'll walk us through some of the nuts and bolts of the tool, and I'll go ahead and share my screen. But first, I had wanted to also point out some of the survey data that Mike mentioned. 3 things that I hope that the Empatico tool will address, including the fear of technology, not knowing how to find another teacher to connect with, and Mike, as you said, the timing and logistics. So make sure, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, those are some cute kids there, Travis.
Great. So I'll cut to the chase and show you what the actual video interaction might look like. So this would be, if I was a teacher, these would be my partner classrooms students. And then here on the bottom right, I would see me and my own students. And so really this video exchange interface might look similar to any other type of video tool like we're using with Zoom now, or if you've used Skype or Google Hangouts before. It's really simple. And that was part of our goal, to make this connection feel as simple as possible so that the focus is really on the interaction between the students. And you don't have to do as much clicking around and navigating on your part. To take a step back from that, in terms of technology, for once you've signed up for Empatico, we have a built-in technology test. So before you actually get to that,
So I see Travis may have frozen for a second there. But Jesse, if you're there with us, could you maybe just jump in for a second and let us know, like, was this as easy as it looks?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk and tell Travis because he definitely knows the technical. Oh, there. Are you back, Travis?
I am.
Okay, I'll let you step right in. You know the technical stuff.
Yep. So for your actual interaction with your partner class, that your audio, your video connection are all stable, and that you're picking up your microphone. So you can see here that it's picking up my camera. I can test my speakers. As we can all tell, my connection quality is a little slower than usual, it says, but I would be or send an email to Empatico's support team to get any support that I might need to help solve any issues that we see with the technology here. This was really built just kind of a fail-safe for teachers to test out the technology before they use it with their students. Taking a step back from that, if I'm a teacher, before I schedule and organize my class for this interaction, I would first sign up for Empatico. And when I sign up, I'm signing up to get matched with a partner classroom somewhere else in the world. And so Empatico is going to take 3 things into account to help me match with another classroom. The first would be the distance between the classrooms, so I'll enter my location on sign up. The times that I'm available to connect my classroom in real time, so you can see this would be an account once I've already signed up. The times that I indicated that I would be available to connect with another classroom in real time. And finally, a common interest in Empatico's activities, or what our students will actually work on and talk about during interaction with a partner classroom.
So Travis, I'm gonna stop you there for a second. And I want to ask you a little bit about those activities, because from what I've seen, there are 4 different lessons right now, I believe, and all of them are attached to standards. So they are things that that actually fit the standards that that most teachers would have in their class, in their curriculum at grades 3 and 4. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. So right now, Empatico offers 4 activities, and these activities are designed with our curriculum partners in Seattle who think about the ways children best learn, in combination with our in-house child development research team, who think about ways that we can bake in what we call the Empatico skills, which include perspective taking, respectful communication, cooperation, critical thinking. So all of these activities include those 4 skills and ways to reinforce them in the classroom. So for example, if I wanted to do this ways we play studies, before signing an overview and download a full activity plan, which really provides, and these are meant to be flexible and open to negotiation between you and your partner teacher on how you best want to implement them and what you'll actually talk about for the video interaction.
And I think that's so important because in all of the experiences that I've had in any teacher to teacher or class to class interaction, and Jesse, I'm gonna ask you for your input on this also in a second. But there may be an activity that we had in mind, but then we always try and adapt it to whatever the topic is that our students are passionate about or that we're learning at the time. And I think that's really that's the magic. That's the art of being a teacher, right? You find what your kids are really passionate about and what they love, and then you build the curriculum into that rather than the other way around. So, I mean, if I'm a reading teacher, I can look at all 4 of these activities and it's easy to read and write and to build those standards into the lesson that we're building. If I'm a social studies teacher, it's really easy to do that. If I'm a science teacher, I can find science standards that are going to be hit by each of these if I just tweak that lesson just a little bit. Jesse, is that what you found when you used Empatico?
Yeah, absolutely. We started with ways we play. We just started very basically. It was something we were both interested in, and plus, the nervousness of connecting with another classroom that you haven't met before. You want to start very simple, and I'll speak to that later about the simplicity of the lesson plan just walks you through piece by piece. But I will speak to what Mike said about the curiosity just naturally drives. The connection on the lesson plans estimated at 20 to 25 minutes. We were on that call for about 50 minutes. The kids were just so curious about each other and wanting to share things that it just naturally progressed from there. So we are still doing the lessons, but we add on our own little things afterwards. So yeah, just drives it. The kids are curious. They're excited.
That's great. One last thing I'll point out from a logistics perspective, once you've been matched with a partner classroom, one of the most difficult things that we've heard from teachers who've done connections in the past is coordinating time zones and figuring out when is the right time to connect. And so since you've listed your times that you're available when you sign up, Empatico will match you based on overlapping availability to have a video connection. So I can see here my times, the times when my partner teacher, who say is in Central Time, so maybe is in Oklahoma or Kansas, and I could see when we overlap, and I could send my partner teacher an invitation to connect at that time, or coordinate here in this chat box and communicate with my partner teacher that way to finalize a good time for us to connect.
Yeah, so compared to other platforms that I've used to make connections, the couple things that I love about Empatico and what you guys are doing. One is that finding the connection is as easy as just putting in the times that I'm available, and the tool does that for you. And the other is that the call actually takes place within the same platform. So I don't have to go and find a connection on Twitter and then set up a call using a different platform, or use a website to find the connection and then use a third-party software in order to be able to connect. Everything is done right inside the tool. And you can have back channel communication and do a test call, and all of that is done right within the website. And I just think that makes it really easy for teachers that haven't ever used anything like this before. Was that kind of part of the design plan, Travis?
Absolutely, to kind of have this all-in-one tool, one-stop shop where you can find a class to connect with, schedule the connection, and then download activities that will guide your conversation, and then actually have the tool within the platform to connect.
Great.
So that was everything that I wanted to cover, but wanted to open it up a little bit to questions in the chat if anyone wanted to follow up. And I can take those throughout the webinar as well.
Okay, great. So actually, I think if anyone's got a question about anything, whether it's about the tool Empatico, whether it's about Jesse's experiences or my experiences with global learning, or just questions you have about logistics in your classroom, like throw it out. We're happy to get to as many of those questions as we can during the night. But right now, I really want to hear Jesse's story because even though we have talked about planning this webinar before, I haven't heard that actual story about you and your students so far. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jesse, and let you tell us about what it was like to actually use Empatico and to make that connection with your kids.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I have to say that my experience probably with Global Connections started about 3 years ago. So I don't have the length of expertise that Mike has. There are a couple different platforms out there. Global Read Aloud was one that I dabbled with, as well as Explore by the Seat of Your Pants. And the connections are wonderful, but like they said before, with Global Read Aloud, you have to find your match, go out there and look for your partner classroom or classrooms, and then be able to know how to connect with that classroom. And so it worked, and it was great for my students, but it really wasn't the level that I was looking for with global awareness. It didn't go to the level of depth that I wanted with relationships. And that's when someone approached me about Empatico and said, have you heard about this new organization, Empatico? It's this free website. It's like Travis said, one-stop shop. The connection's right there. They'll match you. And I thought, oh my gosh, well, sure, sign me up. I've not heard of this. So that day we, the four of us down in our hallway, we sat down and we signed up and registered. And it was exciting when we started getting matches. And we're texting each other, oh my gosh, I got my match. And from then on, it was so easy. And I think that's what I just want to keep on going with teachers that haven't done a connection yet. The ease of this website easily beat any other connection that I've made. You go on there, like Travis said, you pick your schedule, the match is made for you, and then I already had a message from my partner teacher, and so we scheduled a time where we could meet together and do our technology test. And I realized that at my house, my internet connection is not as great, so we had to schedule a time. So it's great with that built-in technology. It tells you exactly, how things are working. But that's kind of the logistics of it. I want to fast forward to when we did our lesson. A big chunk of it is just with you interacting with your classroom and getting things set up. We chose Ways We Play for our first lesson that we wanted to try together, and the kids were just so excited for that first interaction. And like I said before, it was scheduled for about 20-25 minutes is what the lesson plan says. And that camera came on and we saw our partner classroom, and it was just magical. We just didn't want the conversation to end. We followed the lesson plan and we shared perspectives from both sides. And then we just kept wanting to talk and learn more. And we wanted to see their school, and they wanted to see our school. And we finally, the other teacher and I finally said, listen, we have to end this call. We've got to move on with our school day, but we will make sure that we set up another interaction. So we're going to have our third face-to-face interaction this week, actually on Thursday. We have another lesson going up, and it's just very exciting. So after the camera went off, with that first interaction, the kids are just buzzing. And I kept hearing over and over, oh my gosh, they're just like us, and my partner class is in another country, and we were sharing artwork. I mean, that's how detailed this got in this first interaction. Is we're holding up artwork that they're drawing to the camera. They were able to move their camera around so that we could see their playground. And so that was what dawned and connected with them. That first experience is, this classroom is just like us. Even though we thought we have all these perspectives about how different it was going to be, we were the same. For the ways,
Jesse, I'm gonna ask you a question because I know it's on my mind. No, it's okay. One of the things I love, I mean, when I talk to my students about some of their global experiences, they light
Yes,
up just the way that you are now.
they do.
Talking to my
It's
students.
so exciting. Yeah.
But what I'm curious about, and I think there's probably others on the call who have the same question. What was the planning before the call? What did that look like? Because I mean, when you
Yeah.
turn the camera on, that's kind of, if you've never done it before, that's really nerve wracking.
Listen,
Someone
you're
else
very
looking in your
nervous.
classroom, right? So what kind of planning went in beforehand?
Oh my goodness. And thank you for bringing that up, because there again, Empatico, very inclusive with, if you're new to this, I know for me, when I first started diving into this, I thought, I'm a novice. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what to say, or how do you even start interacting with that other teacher? How do you guide the students through the lesson? It's very nerve-wracking. And so I had a little bit of experience, but then when I stumbled upon Empatico and started reading through their lesson plan, it is just step by step how you interact and how you get your kids prepared. So there's a lesson prior that you talk with your kids and you get them interacting. So it's a lot of collaboration within your classroom. We started with Ways We Play. And so really they teamed up together and had to brainstorm all these different ways of what do we do when we go outside? What does it look like when we stay inside? What are some things that we like to play individually? What are some things that we like to do as a group? And then you start selecting from there kind of your team captains, I guess. You're going to have kiddos that come forward and just can naturally speak in front of a camera to take the lead. By the end of the call, all the students wanted to talk, but at the very beginning, they're nervous as well. So there's great prep time before. Now, I will speak to Empatico's mini lessons that they have where they cover the Empatico skills. So we did a lot of that, like in morning meetings. We can talk about those Empatico skills, like perspective taking, critical thinking, the cooperation, respectful communication. So they have many lessons of all those things. The favorite thing that my students did on the call, and now we do it in the classroom, is the Me Too sign. So that you do I don't know if you can see me doing that, but the Me Too. So if you saw another student that said, I like to play kickball, we could all do the Me Too. And they thought that was very cool, just that built-in model. So I will speak, I mean, as a teacher, I've been teaching for 10 years, and to be able to see this type of lesson plan, it is so detailed and intricate that it's just very easy to follow step by step. There's a little bit of a language barrier for me and the teacher. And sometimes they were saying things that I couldn't quite understand, but the kids, it was funny how the kids could understand them. I wasn't sure what they were saying, but the kids naturally could understand what they were saying. So
yeah, and I'm gonna jump on that point for a second.
Yeah.
I've had that experience also, and one of the things that has been an awesome change that I've seen in my classroom. The first time we connected with another class where their accent was thick, my kids didn't know what to do with that. I'm in a very rural area. There's not a lot of diversity. There's not a lot of foreign languages spoken or accents. And we had to have a conversation with it afterwards. But I think over time, after we've had more and more of those experiences, my students have come to understand that, like, how awesome, they probably speak a second language, right? And this is them speaking our language, and yeah, they have an accent, but it's really our job to try and understand it because they've done all the work of learning English, right?
Yes.
And that shift in perspective that happens from global learning experiences, and not just because of accents, but in many different ways, is kind of cool. Jesse, I want to ask you another question about how your students were changed by this experience. But before I get to that, there are some questions that were in the chat that I want to maybe let the Empatico team answer. One of them, there's a lot of questions. This is just such an awesome concept, but right now it's only available for 3rd and 4th grade. So we've got 2nd grade teachers and high school teachers that are asking, when can I get my hands on this? Because this is incredible. So.
Hi, my mute was on. I answered this in the chat. We are working quickly to expand. I think naturally we'll be in 2nd and 5th here pretty quickly. In full transparency, since this is a trust group, I think the thing that we're really working on is ensuring the content is relevant for 2nd graders and for 5th graders. But when you look internationally, grade levels don't always translate. in the same way. So that's why we say broadly 8 to 10 years old. I think if you look at the activities and you think, gosh, most of my kids are 8, for example, who teach in second grade at this point in the year, and you think you can scaffold or it's good for them and you're ready, I would say give it a shot, understanding that, we've got to work with 8 to 10 a little generously given the global nature of it.
Yeah. And I want to throw out there, just for those of you that don't teach 3rd and 4th grade and are still looking for global connections, you maybe can't go through Empatico right now. But I would encourage you to go onto social media and look at like Twitter to try and find connections, and maybe use some of the other video conferencing software that's free out there to try and make connections. And you can even use Empatico's lessons as a building tool, adapt them for your own grade level, your own content area. I know Spark Empathy is a fantastic hashtag on Twitter. That's people that are really concerned about building these kinds of skills for students. Global Ed, hashtag Global Ed is a great way to find connections. So, with a little digging on social media, you might be able to find the connections you want anyway. It's just not quite as easy as Empatico right now. Until they expand maybe to some different grade levels. Another question we had was about time zones. So if you wanted to connect with someone in let's say Taiwan or Australia or somewhere where their students are not in school at the same time as yours, I would guess that Empatico's structure, because of the calendar and the way you put in times, probably doesn't work for that. Is that right?
Travis, do you want to take this one with what we have now and what we're working on?
Sure. So at the moment, if you enter in your schedule and there is no alignment with, say, if you're in the US and with Australia, then you wouldn't necessarily get matched with that classroom. But what we are working on now is developing some tools where you can upload and share photos and videos. And so we'll be rolling those out hopefully in the next 3 to 6 months. So teachers who are already matched in the system will start to be able to get to use some of those tools with teachers they're already matched with. And then hopefully by next school year or so, those tools will be actually used to match classrooms. So you could get matched with a class in, say, Taiwan or Australia, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. Just for me, I'm a little excited about that. That's kind of neat. But Jesse, I want to get back to, because really the theme of the call was not just Empatico, the tool, and not just global connection, but also how we're building compassion and empathy and those kinds of important skills in students. Mm-hmm. So can you talk to us a little bit about how your students changed as a result of this experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we all are aware that there's just a kind of a big shift happening with social emotional in our classrooms. We're addressing that more. And so, for a few years, I've known that I want to somehow make my students more aware of what's happening out there rather than just in our classroom or just in our community. And we were able to do that a few different ways, but it wasn't until Empatico came along, and you can see my connections in Mexico. And so just knowing that they're just our neighbors to the south, but the climate is really different. Obviously their accents, there were so many things that were different, but yet we learned that we're very similar when we started talking. When we started comparing about sports that we like, at first it started that they hadn't heard of some of the sports that we were talking about, like kickball, and until the kids had to describe how you play it, and then they would go, oh, no, I know that sport, and they call it football. And so there was suddenly that connection of, oh, no, we are on the same track. We do have the same sports. We just say it a different way, or we call it by a different name. But as I mentioned, my classroom, my partner classroom's down in Mexico. And so I'm sure, as kids are hearing things on the news, it's very natural for them to know that Mexico is very involved politically right now with kind of the conversations that are happening in the United States. And it was fascinating for me the first time that happened, that suddenly they were catching things that were being said on the news where that had never happened before. They're not really globally aware. And no matter how I try and connect it in different ways, it just wasn't relevant to them. It didn't pertain to their world. And so they didn't get involved. But suddenly the light bulb went off, and things that they're hearing on the news was relevant. It was affecting their world. these were kids that they knew that lived in this country,
Yeah.
that were being impacted. So that was the aha moment for me, when suddenly they were catching on to global news.
And one of the things we know, and I don't know the exact statistic, but I know that I've seen this many times. One of the biggest predictors as to whether or not someone's going to be discriminatory towards others is exposure. People who are exposed to and have interactions and relationships with people who are different than them tend not to be discriminatory towards those people, right? And in these rural communities, like where we teach, where there's not a lot of diversity, it's tough to give kids that perspective, or it used to be anyway, and now it's not. Now we can give kids this virtual experience in the classroom where they get to not only meet people that are different than them, but also work alongside them to generate knowledge, to put projects together, to complete lessons, and that I think is going to have such a huge impact down the road once this becomes more and more commonplace.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of see us as a unit. It's not really them, our partner class, and us. It's funny, when we come together, it's us. We are together. The news, the politics affects us, and it's just an amazing thing as a teacher to see that come alive in the classroom.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you one more question. I know we're kind of out of time, but I'm curious about this, so I'm gonna ask it anyway because I'm the host and I can do that, right? So, but what I'm curious about is, so it's clear that your kids saw their partners differently. Did you see the interactions within your own classroom change at all? And just answer that in 60 seconds, because we have to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely changes. With, like I talked about, the mini skills that we learned, the perspective taking and the cooperation, we learned that specifically for Empatico and for this platform, but suddenly they're applying it just within the classroom. And so they, together they use the Me Too sign when they're talking or collaborating, but then I also hear them talking when they're in their groups, talking about that perspective taking, or that was so-and-so's thought, but here's how I felt, and just being that respective talk. Or I've even heard students say that, that was not respective, or that wasn't respective talk, and we've got those anchor charts of how you say that correctly. So absolutely, it applies with your partner class, but it transitions very easily into just day-to-day functioning.
Yeah, great. All right, Lori, if we could just advance one more. I know we have some kind of reflection questions that we want to talk about. I would love for those of you in the chat to either raise your hand if you've had global experiences in your class, and you can kind of speak to some of the things that I asked Jesse about how it changed your students or how it changed the perspective that they had for others, either inside or outside your classroom. I would love for you to just kind of give a shout out in the chat, and I'd love to hear from you if you got a little 60-second story that you want to tell us. But also, I want to take a look at this slide for a second and just look at some of the opportunities that Empatico and other global learning experiences are creating for others. So I think to myself, how can we, so many school mission statements talk about the need for us to build good citizens and lifelong learners. And, we have all those catchwords that are in our mission statements. But I wonder how often in schools we actually give kids the opportunity to be citizens of their own school, citizens of their own classrooms. And how can we expect kids to develop into lifelong learners when we are dictating everything to them? And I know from the experiences I've seen in my classroom with what Empatico is trying to do and some of the other connections, it's so clear that this sparks passion in kids, and it allows them to discover what they're passionate about and the problems that they want to solve in the world. I talked a little bit about the water filters earlier, about that my students got involved in. But one of my favorite global learning experiences was we had a video conference call where we played a game with the other class. It was a class in Kenya. And they chose an animal and we chose an animal, and we just guessed yes or no questions trying to figure out each other's animal. I'm a science teacher, so we teach animal classification. And at the end of that call, the school director took us on a tour of his village. And he showed us a bridge that was totally, it was scary. I wouldn't let my own kids cross it. But half the village lived on the other side of that bridge. And when my students saw the conditions of the bridge, and they learned that kids in kindergarten and first and second grade were not allowed to go to school because that bridge was so disheveled, they said to me words that stuck with me. And these words are magic. I listen for them every time we have one of these experiences. They said, Mr. Soskell, we should do something about that. Right? They had not only connected with that other group of kids and empathized with them, but they wanted to do something for their new friends to help them out. And we spent a month looking at different bridge designs, and they built models out of paper and then out of cardboard, and they tested them and went through the design process, and they drew up plans. And long story short, over the course of a year, they fundraised and sent their plans over to a bridge builder in Kenya, and we were able to get that bridge built for that village so that everybody in the school, everybody in the village could go to school. And that was totally driven by kids. It was not in my lesson plans. It wasn't the intention of the call that we had, but they got passionate. They saw something that they knew their learning could solve. And I think that's really the ultimate goal that we have here, right? We want kids to have not only great experiences that attach to our curriculum, but we want them to become the kind of people that look for problems in their community, whether it's local community, national community, world, global community, and they use their learning to make those better. So, Michael, I see that you've got a great story to share. If you can unmute yourself, we're gonna let you take it over for a minute or two.
You talking to me, Mike? Okay, so my students were we live in a very rural area of New Jersey. It's called the Pine Barrens. It's literally in the middle of the state. There's no one around. It's farming community, cranberries and blueberries. And when we started doing some of our global interactive lessons with the rest of the world, the students thought there were only two languages, Spanish and English. And when I asked them what did they think they spoke in Spain, they couldn't even make the connection that it was Spanish. So we really embarked on a very wide cultural curve and found that there are 6,909 live languages on the planet right now. And by interacting with a class in Galway, they were able to actually hear other students speaking the Irish language. So it opens up it's cliche, but it opens up the entire world to them. And right now, even for their parents, the world is somewhat small. They don't understand, I think, the larger issues and how interconnected it is. I think the rest of the world has an advantage of knowing that they're so precariously connected to each other, and the United States seems to be very insulated from that kind of global perspective. And I think that that's something that I'm really working on changing.
Yeah, there's so many things to unpack there. I think Michael's right in so many different ways. We are isolated geographically, but even our news coverage in the United States is 99% domestic, which is for anyone that's traveled to different countries. If you put on the news in different countries, it's there's a nice blend of domestic and international news stories that you have there. It's tough for our kids to see beyond. One of the things that's happening more and more, and this is partially due to technology, and actually I have a book that's coming out in less than a month on teaching in the fourth industrial revolution. One of the things we looked at is how technology is driving urbanization, and how urban areas of the United States, our cities, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, have more in common with each other and with other urban areas around the world, the Londons and the Parises and the Nairobis of the world, than they do with the rural areas of their own country. And so even if you're using Empatico to connect New York City to rural Kansas, that's just as important and just as much of a cultural exchange as it would be if you were connecting outside the country. And even if you were being a native New Yorker and growing up on Long Island, if you connected a group of kids from Jamaica, Queens with a group of kids in the Bronx, that is still a totally different experience and a totally different culture. Even within that city, you could have a great cultural exchange. So, I think what you bring up, Michael, is so important in so many different ways. I see, I think it was Kristen, and not Kristen from Empatico, but we have another Kristen on the call that talked about a connection with Ghana. So I don't know if, Kristen, are you still with us, and would you want to share a little bit about that? So we might not have Kristen anymore. So we gave her a shot, but hopefully she enjoyed what she got out of the call before she had to leave. So we only have a couple of minutes left. We have about 10 minutes. Let's I want to go back to the survey data, and if you give me a second, I'm just going to pull it up on my other screen that I have here, and I want to look at some of the stories that you guys shared beforehand about how you realized the world was a bigger place. I shared my story in the beginning of how it hit me that empathy and compassion were some of the most important skills that we teach students. But I know we teach in a country where only, I think, a quarter to a third of the population has passports. And so, we are, as Michael was saying before, very, very isolated as a country. So, one of the things that I see as I'm looking through your answers is that so many of you describe either an experience that you had or that someone else connected to you had internationally. And I wonder if it's possible to dig into that question a little bit more, not just with those international connections, but also what are when was it that you were in a place where you were surrounded by people who were not like you? And that for many of us happens right here within the United States. You don't have to travel to Paris and be surrounded by people that are speaking French to be in a place where there are people that are very different than you. So I don't know if Kristen or Jesse or Travis, if any of you want to share an experience that you had like that, and perhaps there's others that are on the call that want to jump in also.
Hi, this is Marianne. Can you hear me?
Hi, Marianne. Yes, go ahead. We'd love to hear from you. Go ahead.
I've traveled frequently with students to Spain to live in Spanish families, and I myself had an experience when I lived in Spain and gave up my language. And one of the things, even though Spain, we think, oh, Spain is maybe, it's not Kenya, right? It's more similar to the world we live in. It's really not that similar because the rules of the game change. And the social norms change. You kiss hello, you eat at different times of the day. So I think it's exciting. This platform seems really exciting to me because it offers the opportunity to zoom in on particular small moments of a child's life and kind of speed up this process where, for me, for example, and for our students, just having a successful conversation buying fruit is really thrilling, right? Just connecting to another person, or everyone can remember, the doorman spoke to me, or, an old woman asked me for directions, right? Those are those connections. It's sort of like first contact in Star Trek or something, where you're having a moment with someone from another world, and it's the most significant thing ever. So it sounds like you guys, through your stories, I'm hearing that you're having those types of moments in the classroom. You're able to kind of fast forward right to it because you're asking targeted questions and you're digging deep into a small moment. So thank you.
You nailed it,
Yeah,
Marianne.
that's a fantastic narrative and fantastic points. When you talk about bringing students other places, teaching in a place where there's we have a lot of kids that are living below the poverty line.
Right.
And I know for them, there are certainly opportunities within our school district for those international trips. But there are so many kids who would never have the means to be able to do that. Like going to one of the water parks and staying overnight would be like the best trip for them ever. Like, that just doesn't happen. Even those small trips, a half hour away. But now they're able within their classroom to make friends. And I mean that word literally. They make friends with kids that are in very, very different places. And they develop relationships that are every bit as strong as their friendships that they have in person. And that's what drives them to do these service projects that I've seen happen in my classroom. I write about some of them in the book. I speak about them in different places. But every one of the service projects that my students have become known for came from them. It was driven by them because they saw a problem and they said, we can do something about that. And some of them are those big projects, like the water filters in the bridge, but others are just simple things. Like we connected with a seabird hospital in South Africa, and we learned about plastic pollution in the ocean. And my third graders at the end of the call said to me, we are so upset that penguins are being hurt by straws and bottle caps that are in the ocean. That's it. We're not using any more straws in the cafeteria, and we're going to collect bottle caps and use them for an art project, right? Like, that was their little way of making a difference in the world. And I think that's what these kind of experiences, they open up the door for those kinds of things to happen for kids. So Jesse, do you want to add to that a little bit?
Yes, yeah. And in fact, I just got lost in your story, but yeah, it's a huge impact. Like you said, those moments. My students are desperately trying to figure out how we can take a field trip down to Mexico to actually meet them in person. It's probably not going to happen, but I let them think about it and I let them problem solve of how that's going to come to light. But you know, they want to start writing letters now to this class. You know, they're so hungry for more of that connection. And you captured it perfectly by saying speeding up the moments. That was just beautiful. Absolutely, you nailed it. By making that connection, we know their names, they are our friends, and it was just that immediate, that first call just sealed the deal. And so, yeah, and I saw a question off to the side too about, you know, can you expand? And we easily do. The lessons are so wonderful and they're right there. And we do follow the lessons just because of the language barrier. It's a little bit easier for us to follow those lesson plans. But then at the end, we usually add on our own little spin. For this next one, their class wants to do a presentation of their favorite foods, and they are practicing English. We are kind of their practice class. So you can always add on and do your own spin on things. And I think speak to what Mike says of, you know, might see those areas where you can problem solve and grow from it. So yeah, absolutely. It's just, I can't speak enough about how wonderful this platform is. So very thankful for it.
Okay, so we only have a couple minutes, and before we wrap up, I want to share some of the tips that were shared for people who are trying to do this kind of thing in their classroom that came in the original survey. So we have be flexible, which I think is important in any aspect of teaching, but especially when you're doing something like this that's out of your comfort zone. Things are going to, especially when you can't control what's on the other side of the call. You don't know who that other class is going to be, and you may talk with the teacher ahead of time. But kids are unpredictable, right? So who knows what's going to happen? Roll with it, turn it into a learning experience. That's great. Plan twice the amount of time that you think you need, and Jessie spoke to that before. She thought it was going to be a 25-minute call. It ended up being 50. I think that's great. Test out your technology first, and I think Empatico makes that really easy because you can do that right within the platform. A couple of people suggested that. Prepare students for the diversity that they're going to experience, and I think that's really key. Tell them, hey, we may be speaking to a group of kids that has a different accent than us. That is not a reason to make fun of them or to think of them as being different. That's a learning opportunity for us. Think about what our accent sounds like to them, and if you spoke Spanish, what would your accent be? How many of you speak a second language? Isn't that amazing that they have 2 or 3 languages that they speak? All of those are great learning opportunities for kids. So if we can advance, Lori, one more slide. Okay. So if anyone has any questions for us, now's the time. While we're waiting for those questions to come in, I want to remind you that you're going to get a survey afterwards that's going to help us make sure that we know that we hit all of the things that we were supposed to in the webinar, and to get some feedback from us. Yep, that's Joe Fothery. Someone just put that in the chat. Yeah, I noticed that right when he popped up also. Joe and I were both Global Teacher Prize finalists in 2016. So I actually met Joe in Dubai before I met him here in the United States. But yeah, feel free to send any questions in. Make sure you take that survey. Hopefully you got out of this webinar what we were hoping, and that is to get some ideas on why global learning is important, and why we need to develop compassion and empathy and all of those really human characteristics in our kids that allow them to build relationships. We also hope that you found some reasons why global learning might be a way to do that, how that could spark these kinds of skills in your students at home. And we hope that you learned enough about the Empatico platform that you are able to step into your classroom and start using it tomorrow. If you're in 3rd or 4th grade, or maybe even 2nd grade, and you have some kids where those lessons would fit. And for the rest of you, hopefully you got some ideas on why this is important, and you're going to go out and create those opportunities for yourself before Empatico is ready for you, as they're working on that platform to make it available. And like I said, you can find connections on Twitter. There are some different groups that are global learning focused on Twitter and Facebook that you can get involved in. You certainly can reach out to me. I'm happy to help you make those connections with teachers from my network. I'm sure Jessie would do the same. Our information is going to be up in a second. Lori, I think we have that on the next slide if you want to advance that. Oh, Yep, there we go. Okay. So hopefully you enjoyed tonight's webinar. I certainly enjoyed learning from Jesse. And Jesse, my favorite thing that you taught me was the Me Too sign. That was cool. I'm definitely going to steal it off you and use it in my classroom. I didn't know about that. But I learned a ton of other things from you. Thanks everyone who shared. Thanks everyone who joined us tonight. And we hope to see you again soon on another End Story webinar. So thanks for joining us.
Laurie, I just want to tell you that if you want to save your chat, you can. You just go to the bottom of the chat box and you click on that little thing next to the word more, and you can save your chat if you want. Thanks, everybody. Terrific webinar.
Have a great evening.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Goodbye. Thanks.
You can never find the off button.
Good night. Good night. Thank you.
Have a good night.